was the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre? When did it happen? And what caused it? Let's find out in today's episode of the History Chronicles. Hello, I'm Alex and welcome to the History Chronicles. If you like our work, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel in return for exclusive perks, please visit our Patreon page. Now, on with the video. Today's History Chronicles begin in the summer of 1570. During this time, King Charles IX faced mounting debts due to the ongoing religious wars between Catholics and Protestants. Because of this, he decided that a peace treaty should be negotiated with the Huguenots, resulting in the Peace of Saint-Germain signed by the king in August of 1570. The treaty granted the Huguenots control over cities in France, as well as the right to hold public positions. Although the treaty helped end the wars, it enraged some Roman Catholics. The simmering resentment between these Roman Catholic members of the royal court culminated in the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Following the signing of the peace treaty, a strong bond was formed between King Charles IX of France and Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, the leader of the Huguenots. A royal wedding between the king's family and the Huguenots was organised to strengthen the relationship further. However, the friendship was not well received by some members of the royal family, particularly the king's mother, Catherine de' Medici, who was opposed to the Huguenots. There was growing concern that the admiral would easily sway and influence the young king's 22-year-old judgment, thus advancing the needs and desires of the Huguenots in France. As a result, a plan was devised for the assassination of the admiral to prevent Huguenot influence from spreading in the region. Catherine's daughter, Marguerite de Valois, was to marry the Huguenot Henry of Navarre on the 18th of August 1572. A large number of Huguenot nobility travelled to Paris to attend the wedding, and an assassination attempt on the admiral was made during the wedding preparations. On the 22nd of August 1572, the admiral was accompanied by his bodyguard to a meeting of the Royal Council at the Louvre. When the admiral returned to his room on Rue de Bétheny at around 11 a.m, an assassin jumped out of an alley and shot Coligny in the arm, causing serious injuries, but not killing him. The Huguenots were enraged by the attempted assassination of their leader and demanded that the government intervene. The government promised to investigate and punish those responsible for the admiral's assassination attempt to appease them. Knowing that their mission had failed, Catherine de' Medici and her faction nobles at the Tuileries Palace banded together. They plotted the destruction of the Huguenot leaders while they were still in Paris for the wedding festivities. Catherine and her faction began to pressure the king to agree to the plan to avoid a possible retaliatory plan driven by the city's Huguenots. Catherine was also seen meeting with her son in private to persuade him to agree to the plan. The mounting pressure from the Queen and other royal family members compelled the king to agree, and on the 23rd of August 1572, members of the Paris municipality were summoned to the Louvre, where they were given orders to execute the Huguenot leaders. A list was made of the leaders expected to be assassinated, with Coligny at the top of the list. On the morning of St. Bartholomew's Day, the Duke of Guise and the other 1,000 Swiss guards led the attack. The bell of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois began to ring at dawn on the 24th of August 1572, and so started the massacre. Coligny was the first victim to be assassinated under Henry de Guise's supervision. He was beaten to death in his room, and his body was thrown out of the window. The admiral's head was severed and taken to the Louvre to prove his death. Other Huguenot leaders, along with their servants, were slaughtered as the king had ordered. They were attacked, unprepared, rendering them unable to defend themselves. These soldiers brutally murdered them and threw their bodies into the streets. And the killing spree did not stop with the leaders. The soldiers also killed other members of the Huguenot community. Huguenot shops and homes were attacked, and the occupants were brutally murdered and their bodies were thrown into the Seine. The soldiers went from door to door in the Huguenot community and killed everyone, regardless of age or gender. Catholic Parisians also took part in the slaughter, killing every Huguenot they could find. They were forced to repent or be executed for their heresy. They were forced to convert back to Catholicism, and those who refused were killed. The mass killings continued even after the king issued an order to stop them on the 25th of August. As word of the Paris killing spread, so did violence in other parts of the country. The massacre of Huguenots continued into October in other French provinces, including Lyon, Bordeaux, Rouen, Orléans and Bourges. The violence spread quickly in these areas, resulting in the massive slaughter of Huguenot community members across France. Carts were piled high with the bodies of noblemen, women and children who had been slaughtered during the massacre. Their bodies were thrown into rivers, red with the bloodshed of Huguenot community members killed during the violence. They were caught off guard, resulting in the mass slaughter of these community members by French soldiers and Roman Catholic Church loyalists. After the majority of the Huguenots had been slaughtered, the killings ceased. The news of the massacre was met with joy and excitement by members of the royal family and the Catholic Church. Spain's King Philip II welcomed the news. He was not a strong supporter of the Huguenots, especially the admiral, who was inciting war in Spain. Furthermore, Pope Gregory XIII was overjoyed at the news. He ordered a mass of thanksgiving to be held in response to the region's Protestant extermination, and a special model was created to commemorate the event, Huguenotorum Strages, which implied the slaughter of the Huguenots in 1572. It is impossible to pinpoint the exact cause of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. However, the seeds of it can be traced to the Protestant Reformation, which began half a century before. Ongoing religious wars that had begun centuries before resulted in massive debts to the government supporting these wars. As a result, a reformation was required to establish a mutually beneficial relationship between the religions to bring the wars to an end. Peace treaties were signed which granted Protestants equal rights with Catholics. This infuriated members of the Catholic Church, leading to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. And indeed, the admiral's continued influence over the king exacerbated the situation. There was growing concern that the admiral would persuade King Charles IX to support the Huguenot cause. Also, members of the royal family were dissatisfied with the dynamics, which led to the massacre. After the death of King Henry II in 1559, France was weak. It had become profoundly unstable, while the sons of the late king were either weak or incompetent to rule. During this period, the influence of the Huguenots increased in the region, and they hoped to turn the realm into a kingdom of Protestants. Unlike their counterparts, the Protestants believed that they were the elect, and that they deserved to be saved, rather than the Catholics. The increasing influence of the Huguenots in the country incited some of the noblest of the Catholic Church, such as the Guise family. The contrasting religious beliefs created numerous wars between the groups, the first of which was between 1562 and 1564. The second war was between 1567 and 1568, and the third war was between 1568 and 1570. All these wars between the two groups fueled the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. The law and order of the country increasingly failed, while the king was powerless to control and stop the violence. The king was largely influenced by his mother, the Queen, who supported the violence which led to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, resulting in massive slaughtering of the Huguenot people. The massacre had a devastating effect in France. There was massive slaughter of the Huguenots, as well as the destruction of their property. There have been disagreements about the number of people killed during the massacre. Some historians, for example, have argued that 3,000 people were killed in Paris and 10,000 people were killed across the country, while others have estimated the number to be between 20,000 and 30,000. Soldiers destroyed their property, including homes and shops, and are said to have broken down these people's doors and destroyed their shops while trying to find and slaughter them. In general, there was a massive death toll and widespread destruction of Huguenot property in France. Because there were no open escape routes for these people, the death toll was appalling. Catherine's primary goal was to cripple the party of Huguenot nobility who had come to town for the wedding of her daughter, Marguerite de Valois. The massacre, however, did not only cripple the Huguenot wedding party, it also rekindled the hatred that existed between Roman Catholics and Protestants, prompting the renewal of new hostilities between the two groups. There would be ongoing hostilities between the groups for a long time, resulting in more bloodshed and deaths in the country. The king's goal in signing the peace treaty was to end the century-long hostilities between the two groups. However, the massacre only reopened old wounds, resulting in the continuing of conflict. After the massacre, the Huguenots abandoned John Calvin's principle of obedience to the civil magistrate, in favour of the belief that, under certain conditions, tyranny and rebellion were justifiable. The spread of such ideas would jeopardize the peace and prosperity that had been previously established between the French and the Huguenots in France. Following the events of the massacre, the Huguenots' hopes of transforming France were dashed. More significantly, the massacre triggered the region's fourth religious war. The war began in November 1572 and lasted until the summer of 1573, when the Edict of Boulogne was issued. The war resulted in a large number of deaths and destruction of property. It was, however, brought to an end with the signing of a new treaty. The Huguenots were granted amnesty for their previous actions and religious freedom under the new treaty. Even though the Edict of 1573 granted the Huguenots religious freedom, it limited some of the agreements made in the Treaty of the Peace of Saint-Germain, such as allowing Protestants to practice their religion. As a result, the war between Protestants and Catholics would rage on for the next century. But after the signing of the Treaty of the Edict of Nantes in 1598, the war came to an end. Overall, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre was one of the most tragic wars in history between Catholics and Protestants. The war resulted in the mass slaughter of Huguenots who were in France at the time of the outbreak of the war. But factors such as the increasing influence of the Huguenot leader, Admiral Coligny, on the king, created fear among members of the Royal Council about the Huguenots' increasing influence and activities in the country. Following the failed attempt to assassinate the leader to prevent a Huguenot uprising, the king ordered the assassination of the Huguenot leaders. However, soldiers and other Catholic loyalists, fueled by bloodlust, continued to massacre ordinary members of the community. They went door to door, killing anyone who belonged to the Huguenot community indiscriminately. The king's attempt to broker a long-term truce between the two factions failed. The Fourth Religious War between the two groups began in November 1572 and lasted until 1598. Following the massacre, the Huguenots abandoned John Calvin's principle to obedience to the civil magistrate in favour of the belief that, under certain conditions, tyranny and rebellion were justified. There have been mixed reactions to the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in modern society, particularly among Protestant and Catholic historians. Leaders such as Admiral Coligny and his colleagues were regarded as heroes who fought to protect the interests and rights of the Huguenots. They are the victims of a deliberate plot to demolish the Huguenot movement. Similarly, Catholic historians regard the king as a true and protective leader for issuing orders to protect the Catholic crown from Protestants. However, the king's order for the capture and execution of Huguenot leaders did violate French traditional laws and practices. The king had ignored the standard legal procedures established by customary laws, regulations, and practices. The sheer barbarism of killing those suspected of practicing a religion other than the majority continues to fascinate and divide people in modern society to this day. You have been watching the History Chronicles. We'd love to know what you think of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Please let us know below, and if you enjoyed our video, please give us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Also, if you'd like to support our work going forward, please visit our Patreon page, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the History Chronicles.